Good afternoon, everybody out there. And I'm here with Dr. Hemminger and speaking from USI, and welcome. So let me introduce Bill first. I'm honored to introduce Professor Emeritus, Dr. William Heminger, a distinguished colleague and dear friend. Dr. Heminger retired from the University of Evansville, where he taught English, African literature, and foreign language. His educational background includes studies at Juilliard and Columbia University in New York, the Sorbonne in Paris, and the Ohio State University. Among his many awards are Fulbrights, Peace Corps, and research awards that led him to Madagascar, Senegal, and Cameroon. Dr. Hemminger's list of academic and creative achievements is extensive. He has published papers on African literature, novels and poetry, translations, and choral compositions. Moreover, he is a skilled organic gardener, a social activist, an accomplished pianist, and an excellent cook. In another word, a Renaissance man with a conscience. So after Dr. Hemminger completes his talk on Growing Good, a beginner's guide to cultivating caring communities, there will be a Q&A session. So feel free to post your comments and I will coordinate them for Bill to answer. So Bill, the screen is yours.
Oh, I don't think I've ever had a screen before. So this is my first screen. So hello, and I thank you for that great introduction. I've written a long piece here about community because that's something important to me. It has to do with the book that I wrote, but and I actually have a kind of poor title for the piece, which is called "What is Community?" Because I lacked.
Bill, your sound is gone. Bill, your sound is off.
Ago, I heard Mary Louise Kelly on National Public Radio thank Evansville members of the WNIN community, her words, for supporting that radio station. I guess that I'm part of that community, though I'm not aware of my fellow communitarians, and I only know that what we have in common is that we give money to the same place. Driving to Aldi yesterday, I passed a forbidding congregation of imposing mixed mansions hemmed in by menacing fences and approached only through a funneling gate. This is only one of several gated communities in our city. I know that I am not part of that group for whom the word community signals a socioeconomic distance from me and others. Somehow I doubt that the denizens of that residential area think of themselves as community either. Though retired from a local university, I still read every day university news that is addressed to the campus community. As it has for many years, that phrase, campus community, seems to imply a familial, certainly professional democratic atmosphere at my former university. Yet, as a matter of course, this same institution pays its business faculty much more than it does professors in the humanities, many of whom have superior credentials and have larger teaching loads. Patently unfair. And that same institution recently cut faculty positions in the most repugnant of ways while maintaining an expensive sports program in toto. These are surely not the actions of a caring community whose members show respect for one another and who, together, seek the well-being of the institution as a whole. So, as you can see, I have a problem with the word community. Perhaps more accurately, I have a problem with how this word is used so casually and glibly these days, generally to imply a group of people dedicated to a single, often beneficial purpose and to caring for one another in the group, whether they do or not. Ironically, that word is part of the title of my recent book, Growing Good, A Beginner's Guide to Creating Caring Communities. Simply stated, the book is a collection of statements, some visual, some poetic, some in prose, from people who, in their many ways, define and help create community in its more restrictive and, to my way of thinking, appropriate senses. And from my own experience, I have developed a few caveats for a more meaningful definition of the word community. I've been married for 40 years now, and my family, which includes 2 grown daughters, never has resided near the homes of biological family members, which means no automatic babysitters, no one to share Sunday dinner with or any other meal for that matter, no one able or possibly not always willing to show up to help dig flower beds in the fall, to walk the dog, or to do anything else. And yet we have felt part of communities of people wherever we have lived. In Southeast Ohio, our world is rural. Our neighbors lived a small distance from our home, yet our lives intertwined in so many ways. My wife and I were friends and mentors to a neighbor's daughter who had had a tough time in the local high school and for whom we were a sounding board. Her family and we shared many meals, many holidays, many walks in the woods. Though we were not kin, we behaved as though we were, sharing ordinary events in our daily lives, some that were uplifting, others difficult, and depending on one another in myriad ways. We were a family in a place where none of us had family, and we were very close. After finishing a PhD, I took a teaching job in Evansville, and we had to leave our home and our family of friends in the country. Setting up a household in Evansville, we had to begin the process of finding community all over again. This time, though, there were other people like us in the same boat, colleagues from all over the United States and the world for that matter. We all had ripped out roots somewhere else in order to plant and establish ourselves in this sweaty corner of Indiana. And now there were children in our family pictures. With our new and extended family of friends, we cared for one another's kids. We carted foodstuffs to the park for innumerable group picnics. We shared rides and colds and dinners and pets. We learned about friends' triumphs and disappointments, made public our own. Most of these friends have left Evansville by this point, though we still get together online, on the phone, and less often in person. We still care for one another, though not in the daily intimate ways, perhaps. These community experiences were not limited to our lives in the United States either. Fulbright Awards that I won took me and my family to Africa on 2 occasions for an academic year each. These times, too, we benefited from what I think were supportive communities that we forged with others, if only for a short time. The year we spent in Madagascar, our elder daughter's first year of life, we felt particularly vulnerable. There we were, a very American couple with a baby, our first, in a very different culture and a vastly different physical and social world. All year, we were utterly dependent on the kindness and largesse of Malagasy friends, 2 sets of friends in particular, for help with just about everything: how to wash diapers properly in a tropical environment, where and how to get food, not quite as simple as a foray to Schnucks, how to deal with cows that walked through the city and didn't willingly share the roadways and sidewalks with humans, among other daily practical concerns. In Cameroon, 15 years later, we were adopted by an African driver who got us, now 4, to school each day in a city of more than 3 million people where no roads have names. With the exception of a sparingly stocked department store owned by Indians, we had to find various vendors for paper clips, maps, toothpaste, wine, and so many other things. Our driver knew where to find everything, and then how to haggle down the asking price. When I had questions about the guys hired to watch our apartment building, when we needed grass for our guinea pig pets, we knew whom to ask. Over the year, we got to know him and his family very well. We hear regularly via Facebook from him now. Friendships forged over foreign languages were not a problem. Our need to bond with others was so great. Well, while in none of these cases did we share kinship with any of these people, we nonetheless lived in a common locality, and we worked collectively to meet basic and physical and social needs. There was also an unintentional reciprocity in our interactions, and I know that we benefited mutually from this togetherness. And even in the shorter periods of community, we created a history, our own, with those people, a history that we can look back to now with gratitude. Many years ago, as an undergraduate at Columbia in New York City, I got to know a particular graduate student very well. He was completing a graduate program in psychology at the time and had taken time away from a Benedictine monastery to work on his academic degree. He ultimately returned to monastic life and founded a monastery on a beautiful site in the Hudson River Valley. Though never a practicing Catholic, I continued to visit him at that place throughout my student years in New York. Through him, I learned firsthand about communities whose binding principle is common reverence for a deity and for the rigors of practiced devotion and intentional self-sacrifice. The monk introduced me to Charles de Foucault, which is not to be confused with the French philosopher. This Charles de Foucault was an adventurer turned ascetic. Foucault spent his last years as a hermit, living among the Tuareg people in the extraordinarily inhospitable rocky desert of southern Algeria, and he has recently been canonized by the Catholic Church. In an earlier book, African Sun, I wrote about Foucault and the ways that self-deprivation might make people more human, strangely enough, and about the benefits of a rigorous focus on prayer, however this term may be defined, and on physical work. Although Foucault's community ultimately amounted to no one but himself, many of the community principles were the same: intentionally denying excessive physical pleasure, making few demands of the environment, refusing to give in to the allure of the material world. Though today I do not consider myself an adherent to any religious faith, and faith is yet another very vexed word these days, I can see how such commitment to clearly expressed and obviously humane values may act as a powerful cornerstone of one's life. As it turns out, Evansville is not far from Bardstown, Kentucky, the site of the Abbey of Gethsemane, yet another religious community in the very strictest of senses. This Trappist monastery makes very severe demands of its community members. All follow a strict daily schedule, they call it an order, of physical labor and personal devotion. Many are committed to lives of silence, which would be a nice regime for a lot of politicians, I think. What drew me to Gethsemane, though, was the figure of Thomas Merton, perhaps not so well remembered these days, but quite influential, well into the 1980s for sure. Years ago, we all read The Seven-Story Mountain, his autobiography, and people became fascinated with this monk with a very worldly past who, even after entering into an austere monastic life and shunning society, remained keenly interested in world events and social justice. His poems were well known. A famous one laments the lives of the 4 children killed in the Birmingham church bombing. Others bewail U.S. involvement in Vietnam. He was a groundbreaker in bringing together practitioners of various religious traditions, which he felt might all be an expression of one. And he was, as the monks say, formed in community. Here was an activist who lived as a hermit. Here was an influential writer who could accept no accolades for his work. Here was a loner who carried the world's troubles on his shoulders. His death in 1968 resulted from his bizarre electrocution in a hotel room in Thailand, where he had traveled to attend a world conference on monastic life, and partly also in order to meet the Dalai Lama. The profligate fraternizing of his early days, he too attended Columbia University, where he was no model student. He was shaped through community into a quiet, generous, exemplary spirit of a deeply experienced man. That's right. In my life, I've been fortunate to have had the opportunity to live and work on several continents among different people. Wherever I have been, I have conscientiously tried to create home, a place where my family and I feel safe, a place that reflects the many interests that I have, a place to which I may invite others, a place where I might cultivate the earth. This sense of home may not be much different from that described by Robert Frost in his narrative poem, Death of the Hired Man. Frost writes, "Home is the place where, when you go there, they have to take you in." In the poem, a farmer's wife pleads with her husband to allow the hired man, now aged and failing, to return to their farm, probably to die there. He has no other place to go, and the land on which he worked, his daily routine of discipline, has become his home, the place identified with him, if only tacitly. But that the hired man associates himself at his most vulnerable moments with a place is, I think, significant. The place where we live, our lives can, perhaps should, become for us a community of sorts. Many humans have an unfortunate tendency to think of the natural world as purely a resource. For many, the natural world is something to be exploited for what materials and services it might provide us human animals. In her wonderful 2013 book, Rating Sweetgrass, scientist and writer Robin Wall Kimmerer provides an extended description of a mythological figure in Native American storytelling, the Wendigo, which is the embodiment of obsessive consumption. What Native Americans said about themselves with the Wendigo surely applies even more strongly to most of us today. If more of us lived in conscious community with the natural world, we would not likely be facing the impending conflagration of the planet. A major metaphor in Kimmerer's book is, of course, though, the sweetgrass and the many and various uses Native Americans make of this aromatic herb native to northern Eurasia and to North America. Native Americans like Kimmerer consider the plant sacred. They may use it, but they must also respect and tend it. In the course of her academic career, Kimmerer took a position at Syracuse University in upstate New York. One of her first tasks in settling herself into the new job and the new environment was to locate and care for patches of sweetgrass. What happens when people have little or no knowledge of the physical world around them, she wonders. She feels that disorientation can stem from our not knowing the place we inhabit, without knowing or caring to know the names of climax, trees, or minute ground covers, native birds or animals. Our lives are diminished when we are ignorant of the world of which we are at best perilously a part. For Kimmerer, this human disorientation is, as she says, an estrangement from the rest of creation. If creation includes us all, then community is what ties life forms, plant and animal, human and non-human, together. In my contribution to Growing Good, a Beginner's Guide to Creating Caring Communities, I describe efforts to create a community vegetable garden and the cadre of people who care to tend that garden on available land nearby in our city. In this instance, community refers both to the interconnectedness the neighbor gardeners develop with one another, as well as our human connection to the soil and the land and the plants that live on the soil. We are all now aware of the importance of eating local, which at the very least saves in the cost of transportation of produce from somewhere else. The conditions under which local foods are produced can also be known. If we object, we can eschew chicken factories, sweat houses, or broccoli grown in unnaturally fertilized fields. Then add these facts. In Evansville, we have a salubrious climate for the most part, generally good soil, which can always be amended, and lots of space on which to grow food. Added bonuses of working in a garden include the following. Physical labor is good. Work outdoors is good. Working with others on a shared and edible goal is good. And being planted in public, the garden results can be seen, even admired, and by many. Extending along a noisy stretch of the Lloyd Expressway, our garden boasts rows of colorful Swiss chard. They don't call the seed strain bright lights for nothing. Arching sunflowers that in full profligate flower bring on the goldfinches as the summer dries out and productivity fades. Sun gold cherry tomatoes that weigh down the great tropical plants with brilliant, succulent, sun-like fruits, and all this just for starters. Now late in the season, myriad persimmons dangle like Christmas ornaments from branches whose leaves have turned a wild magenta mahogany color and freely salute passing vehicles. As produce becomes available throughout the summer season, all gardeners may take what they want, and there is always much more. Some that we sell at low prices to neighbors, much delivered free to local food pantries. To my mind, it is an ideal sharing out. In this community, all may benefit. By judicious crop rotation, the addition of mulch to retain moisture in the soil, and permitting ground covers to protect the soil throughout the winter months, we do as much as we are able to keep the soil healthy. Kimmerer feels that, as in any contract or as in any covenant, we bear a responsibility to care for the earth that feeds us food, provides innumerable sources of beauty and wonder, responds readily to proper care. Our interest in the green world supports what biologist Edward O. Wilson calls biophilia, the urge we feel to affiliate with other forms of life. In this community, gardeners create links to the soil as they bond with each other in their work. There are other ways, of course, to care for the planet and to take responsibility for our place in the greater natural network of beings. The essay Standing Up to the Super Polluters in Growing Good describes the social activism of a woman who has worked with members of the Sierra Club locally to redress the ills of air pollution, much of which has been emitted by the many coal-burning power plants that dot the Ohio and the Wabash rivers. Of course, extracting coal from the ground also produces much pollution, and as in the mountaintop mining in West Virginia, destroys waterways and ecosystems, even if the land is, quote unquote, restored, as the economic gains of mining diminish. This is yet another example of the sad arithmetic of capitalism. Not unlike the suburban yards that have become virtual deserts after years of sucking up chemical fertilizers and clear-cut forest stands whose supporting soil has eroded in the first big rain with no viable root systems to keep the dirt in place, our region has breathed toxic air for years and will continue to suffer degradation to local ecosystems even when the smokestacks have gone dormant. But identifying the problems and the sources of these problems has been an enormous first step. Now, thanks to the efforts of people like this activist author who have taken on the difficult work of social action, we may begin undoing the harm brought on by years of despoiling our natural environment, the land, and the air. Ecological activism represents a powerful way for us to speak publicly and passionately for the land on which we live and whose health directly relates to our own. A conscientious community cannot thrive when all members are not well or cared for. Much exciting, I think, scientific study has been done in recent years on the fuller implications of biological communities, particularly tree communities. And this science deepens and extends our understanding of community in general. Such works as Finding the Mother Tree, a 2021 book by Suzanne Simard, Richard Powers' magnificent 2018 novel, The Overstory, or Peter Wohleben's 2016 study, The Hidden Life of Trees, all describe the world of trees in ways most of us have never imagined. Complex ecological connections among trees show that they are capable of forming and sustaining relationships, for example. As the title of Simard's book suggests, trees do have the capacity to succor their small offspring. Her research on the Douglas firs of British Columbia has shown that trees also make use of the quote-unquote World Wide Web of sorts, a network of subterranean mycorrhizal fungi. Fungi are these cottony fungal filaments in the soil that penetrate and connect tree roots and provide a path for trees to send food, news, and even distress signals to other trees via chemical compounds and electrical impulses in their root system. The mother Douglas fir may sense that its offspring is in trouble and can send food to a failing sapling nearby via this World Wide Web. There are also many underground activities. There are many other underground activities. Fungi may release poisons into the rhizosphere, which is the environment of land, of soil and microbes near the tree roots. If parasitic nematodes, which are these little worm-like creatures that can damage tree roots, if these nematodes enter the community. Fungi also consume microbes and break down chemicals to give to the tree in a form that the tree might use. The tree, in exchange, provides the fungi with sugar and carbohydrates. So much of this knowledge has only recently become available to us thanks to improvements in microtechnology. In their recent book, Teeming with Microbes, authors Lowenfels and Lewis state that, and this is a quote, a mere teaspoon of good garden soil measured by microbial geneticists contains 1 billion invisible bacteria, several yards of equally invisible fungal hyphae, several thousand protozoa, and a few dozen nematodes. And remember, That's only a teaspoon. These are the interactive citizens of the soil community. And the apparently mute and stolid tree becomes a site of great activity, though not of course on a scale for humans to perceive, at least without help. In fact, tree roots function more as the brain of the organism. They search out food, increase arboreal security. Now we know that while trees may not move as humans do, they are constantly changing and growing. But this view of non-human nature as without agency persists. Writing about animals, the prominent 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger claimed that they are, quote, world poor, that is, mute, malleable objects in the world. And this, of course, in opposition to humans who shape and who certainly may destroy that world. It has been human hubris that has relegated plants and animals to lower levels of sentience. Yet the community of organisms in our front yards, provided the soil is healthy, exceeds in diversity and abundance human covenants on earth. So where have we come? Well, we can discount the rhetorical use of the word community, the cheap tool used by advertisers and populist politicians to suggest inclusivity and to promote specious feelings of well-being or cozy uniformity. We should also recognize that community is not a universal category. Communities may be casual, they may be temporary, they may change over time. At any given moment, most of us might feel that we are a part of a number of communities, formal and not. Some of us are students who have developed close associations with classmates or club groups. Some of us belong to extended church families. Some of us may have intentionally found families among friends. Some of us also take responsibility for what we believe is the community of us living together in a particular place on the land and with the land. Some of us see ecological activism as our ethical duty to restore and, or maybe only to establish, a dyadic relationship between us and the world we inhabit. In the words of one of the contributors to Growing Good, and this is a quote, I believe that deep in our biological, spiritual, and cultural DNA, we are made for belonging in our human communities and in whole earth communities. That author runs a not-profit interfaith spirituality center in Louisville, Kentucky. Another contributor, an administrator of an inner city nonprofit here in Evansville, actively creates community as she interacts with visitors. She uses the word guests who come into her building, and this is a quote, for a cup of coffee, for a loaf of bread, to use our phone or fax machine, to rest in our library, to try to figure out where to go for help with rent or utilities, to take a shower, or simply to have someone to talk to. The work of community may be as simple as speaking with or listening to a person, or it might involve intentional silence or prayer. It can be found in the actions of a food bank that stores and then distributes food to hungry people. And it can be found in a Catholic worker house of hospitality, whose doors are open to women and their children fleeing abusive situations. But in all cases, most of us have to work at being in community, which at best is an intentional association of people for a particular purpose, to work with one another and to work with the world that encompasses us. That's the end.